Welcome to The Nation. I'm Jessie CHAHAL. Today we take a closer look at a recent survey by Ipsos, a global leader in market research, to understand how Malaysians feel about the country's current state and future direction. Very important discussions there. Joining me today is KIRANJIT SINGH, regional head of APEC at Ipsos Strategy 3, who's here to break down the key findings from the latest survey. Also, we're joined by socio-political analyst Dr. KUMARARAJAH, who will share his perspectives on the implications and impact of these key findings. Welcome, gentlemen. Let's begin with this. Malaysia saw a 12% drop in the number of people who believe in the country. Obviously, that's in a declining arrow there. That seems to be the biggest improvement among all countries that's surveyed. So Kiran, give us an understanding from your perspective. What do you think contributed to this shift?
The stats says that more Malaysians feel that the country is in the right direction compared previously 2-3 years back. And if you break down the issues and the reasons why they feel this way, is because the macroeconomic fundamentals are stronger than before. Inflation is tapering down, low unemployment, political stability, and there's no really major issues, racial issues or any other issues, social issues, which makes them feel that nervous about the future. So compared to 2-3 years back, they feel that the country is in a better direction than previously. However, 40% feel the country is still in the declining stage. So you need to understand the complex issue of it.
Okay, complex as it is, yes. 12% upwards, but 40% still feel that the country is in a declining mode. AT, coming to you in terms of factors that has contributed to this 12% improvement from economic or social, what do you think contributed to this renewed belief and optimism?
Again, I mean, I don't know when Kiran is coming from. Either you look at it from a glass half full or glass half empty perspective. But I think in some areas where it's a bread and butter issue, I think the country is fairly doing very well. So if you look at things like you mentioned, inflation, we look at economic progress, we look at what's really putting food on the table, I think those kind of issues is fairly well managed. We still got a long way. Still there are a lot of gaps that needs to be filled. A government that's like just past its midway point is still probably, I don't think they are baby footing around certain issues, but they still haven't got that grasp on the handle very strongly. But then there are still other issues where we probably still want a lot of improvements, and I think that's also contributing to why we're not seeing better improvements now than what we are already seeing. So to me, there are a lot of gaps that's not being filled, right? So you don't have to go very far. You just look at all the statements that Bernama is making, right? So you look at all the headlines that coming out, even for the last week, 10 days. There seems to be a little bit of a shake-up of the system, and the people who professed of certain changes are probably not seen to be doing it. But there are some justifications to that. I suppose we did have that discussion just now. So to me, we are still somewhere in the middle, right? So within that bell curve, we are within the margin of error.
So the concerns are there by the people, and that also shifts a little bit, and it does adjust. Kiran, when you talked a little bit about that 40%, why is that status quo?
I think he alluded to the fact, for example, cost of living. While economically, on the macro level, we are doing okay, but on a personal front, there's a disconnect between how they feel the country is moving against their livelihoods, right?
The
reality of their daily life. So cost of living, and also, for example, governance issues. So governance issues and rising cost of living are two of the driving factors why 40% feel that the country can do better.
Now, we also saw one of the other key findings from the research was the fact that there was a slight drop in how Malaysians believe that our society is broken. What does that mean? And is that a positive thing or a negative thing? I'm not too sure how to read this finding.
Okay, when we look at whether the society is broken, there are many factors of it. For example, whether the economy is rigged towards the rich and powerful, whether the economic system is free and fair. So if we look into the different factors and so on, there are some positive signs. But nevertheless, Malaysians feel that the country's economic system needs an overhaul.
Okay.
Which we can look into further. But basically, I think one of the biggest driver they feel is that the divide between the elites and the common man. Those are the biggest factor right now.
So of course that also goes back to the earlier key finding in terms of the belief of the country and having hope. AT, with that in mind, do you say that this may signal to perhaps lack of progress in nation building, something that has been talked about a lot?
Like, so, I mean, again, you look at it, you say, is it a lack of progress or is it growing pains? Because of a country of our size, 33 million, we're neither here nor there. We don't have the large population footprint, say, some of our neighbors like Indonesia has got. Even Philippines, if you compare, they've got 100 million, we are 33, right? So we are 1/3 of them. But this is part of the growing pains that many of countries in our mid-tier countries which are wanting to become developed go through. So that very Kiran spoke about the structural issues that we have, right? So our economy is not that high value, high innovation economy. We're still very much export dependent economy. 175% of our GDP is actually driven by trade. Whereas if you compare, say, Indonesia, they're at 40%. So they have got a population that can sustain their own domestic consumption, but we don't have such things. So that's reason why, say for example, that ASEAN meeting that you hosted last week, right? It makes a lot of sense for many of these superpowers of the world to actually come to Kuala Lumpur to speak, because we are center of attention. Second is economic structural issues. Right? I think the government is doing all it can in terms of addressing, say, low wages. Our whole wages is structured towards it hasn't really changed over the last 20-30 years. But we are trying to address it with using the progressive wage model, for example. So YB Steven Sim has spoken about progressive wage model. We are anchoring ourselves to this national investment aspirations, which are very high-tech, high-value jobs that we want to drive. So I think this is part and parcel of nation building. It is not lack of nation building, it is that growing pain that we're going through. And I think as Malaysians, we should also subscribe to this. You know, there's a lot of discussion about people crossing the straits, across the causeway and going over for even medical doctors. But that's part and parcel of how we need to reform the system. It's not about resetting it.
Okay, nation building versus growing pains. I think that's still a question that needs to be explored a little bit more. But moving on, with the key findings as well, Kiran, compared to countries like the UK and the US, where perceptions barely changed, or in fact they did worsen, how would you describe Malaysia's current national mood, despite the fact of the 12% drop in number of people who believe the country?
Generally, Malaysians, compared to our peers, are also, for example, UK and France and so on, we are more hopeful. Okay, so that is why you see some of the sentiments improving. We are hopeful. We are not satisfied, but we are hopeful that things will get better. I think that is the key takeaway from this. They are hopeful things will get better. Now, the other thing is where we're seeing is that a majority of Malaysians, right, about 40%, are really not sure how they feel about the state of the nation. Is it good or bad? Because there are certain parts of it they're happy with, there are certain parts of it they're less happy with. So majority of them, 40%, are still trying to debate and figure out, you know, how they feel about the nation.
Well, would you say, AT, this might be the first step towards a better mode or a good thing? Because could this then indicate that we are at a phase of culminating or having or accumulating greater confidence? I think
it's also the majority of Malaysians, right? So when you ask the mood, I think we are aspirational in nature, right? So while we know that there are things that are still a lot of challenges on the ground, we're going through a phase we probably haven't seen in the last, say, 20-30 years of economic development, and also the regional pressures that we have across here. But I think Malaysians as such are quite aspirational. Yes. They still have confidence in the government. They still have confidence, especially in our Prime Minister. And I think there are areas where I suppose it's easy to criticize, but I think it is still like, look, this government will deliver. This system will work for us. We need to mend it to be able to, always think about it like, think global, act local. So we can mend the system, but it's a system that has worked very well for us for the last 60, closer to 70 years now. And it, I think, will move forward in the right direction. Maybe the speed is wanting. Yes. So that's probably being reflected by the numbers that Kiran did. But I think the direction is right.
Okay, in the right direction. The mood is hopeful and aspirational as well. Now, we're still very much in ASEAN mode. What are, or would you say, are there regional factors, Kiran, that play within Southeast Asia that gives explanation or sheds light in terms of the diverging sentiments between countries like Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia?
There's no regional drivers. Each country is unique by its own. If you see Indonesia, for example, it's a very interesting case study. 63% of Indonesians, which is very, very high, one of the highest in the world, feel the country is in the decline. And it's a 21% jump compared to 2 years ago. There's a huge jump. Prabowo, when he took over the office late last year, early this year and so on, he entered the country with a very high approval rating. But since then, his rating has gone down steadily, right? And that has to do with a couple of factors. For example, some of his keynote initiatives, for example, the free lunch program did not go as well as he expected, right? There's a lot of problems there. And also what we are seeing right now is the middle class in Indonesia is shrinking. Very high youth unemployment, almost about 20% and so on. So that is why it's quite common. You can see there's a lot of catchphrase in Indonesia right now. For example, a kabur aja, which says let's escape first from Indonesia and come back when things get better. And also gelap Indonesia or dark Indonesia. So there's a lot of unhappiness with the state of things. A lot of less hopefulness compared to 2 years ago in Indonesia. So there's no regional drivers, but it has to do with each country's macro and microeconomic situation.
Can this be reflected in our own context for our nation, AT? Do you think that we have any shared or unique pressures that we're facing?
I think we also have to figure out, I think from an ASEAN perspective, right? So you started off with that. I think internally we need to cooperate and externally we need to compete. So ASEAN, while they're all very heterogeneous group of heterogeneous group of countries, they've got advanced economies like Singapore. We have got mid-tier economies like us, Thailand, Indonesia. We have also backward economies like the CML countries. But I think that regional cooperation is being addressed in some manner or the other in many of these ASEAN platforms. But I think many countries are also inward-looking because many of these countries are very dependent on a lot of other bilateral relationships that we have. But there is a lot of domestic pressures. Like, for example, like many of the things that Kiran mentioned just now, right? So a lot of this is because of the leadership change that has happened in some of these countries. For example, Singapore, Indonesia, which are all very recent within the last 3-4 quarters, right? We, on the other hand, are like closer to the next general election than we were from the earlier general election. So in a way, we are in not a political change, whereas those countries have gone through a political change. And I think those countries, again, many incumbent presidents or heads of state will probably start with the approval rating which is there and then eventually decline at some point in time, but reinforce it at mid-tier.
Right.
Midway.
From what we've spoken about and some of the stats we are looking at as well, it all seems to be part of the bigger picture because Malaysians also saw, or rather Malaysia also saw, as you mentioned earlier, about a 6% increase in the number of people who believe that the main divide in society is among the elites and ordinary citizens. Now, this, of course, is a pain point here. What does this say about Malaysians' growing perception in terms of public trust in institution, governance, leadership, politicians?
Sure, and this is an increasing trend. And I think if you look into the report, I think this is what stands out, and I think this is what the policymakers should take note of. So they feel that the country is not, is rigged towards the rich and powerful. We used to live in different houses, but we had the same life. But now, there are people who live in a different world, whereas the common man live in a different world, and so on. So that is actually the biggest fault lines in Malaysia's economic structure right now, where the common man feel that it's not an even playing field. Even the two-tier justice system in many ways, and so on. So that is why if you see New York race, for example, Mamdani, right, he's getting traction, and he is winning crowds both from the left wing and the right wing. So there's a theory called the horseshoe theory, where the extreme right and the extreme left are converging towards something new and different. They don't mind breaking the system. Okay, but how they feel that the system needs to be rebuilt is different things. But both of them are coming together to say that, you know what, enough is enough. We need a new system and so on. And if that economic divide is not addressed, we may have some kind of polarization moving forward.
The horseshoe theory, how's that going to pan out
before
in
we come to the
Malaysia?
horseshoe theory, right? So also that question of the idea that, you know, people feel that the elite are actually monopolizing. I think a lot of it is also because of our own making. In the last years, when this new government came into place, there was a lot of victimization of this word. I mean, words like mahakaya has been, you know, driven into the psychic of the people to say, look, you know, probably the whole system is being rigged towards the elite group, or probably the top 1%. That's probably possibly not true, because even if you see now 3 years into this government, nothing much has really changed along those lines. So it simply means in a capitalist system, the fittest will survive. So what we need to probably address is to bring in more transparency, to bring in more that involvement of the middle class towards this economic development, because end of the day it's still economics.
Okay,
Nobody would be complaining if this was governance issue. This is all economics.
But here's the thing, 77% of Malaysians agreed that this divide exists.
Yes. So that's the thing. We are a very class society.
Talk about
right?
convincing.
We are the only, I mean, to me, many of the times we are the only ones who keep saying, look, you know, this is B40, that is M40, and then the T20. We can't even figure it out where the numbers are at this point in time, right? So in that way, that tiered class system is our own making. We have not literally, we have said, we pride on the budget that comes out every October and says, look, you know, we've got $10 billion and 40% of the adult population under coverage of Sumbangan Tunai Rahmah.
Okay, wait, AT, I'm going to hold you on that thought. 77% of the population, that is about slightly more than three-quarter of Malaysians agree that this divide exists, and that as well is well over the global average, Kiran. What is this indicating?
Sure, it is moving, it's saying that we're moving away from race and religion divide to social class. So, for example, in US, Donald Trump, he won based on, so it was educated class, the people with bachelor's degree and above overwhelmingly voted for the Democrats, whereas the blue-collar workers with non-degree holders voted for Donald Trump and so on. So in Malaysia, it's not so much on education level, but it has to do more about the income level. One of the biggest pain points Malaysia is facing right now is the upward mobility. If we really see relative mobility against your parents and so on, is still increasing. Everyone has a degree these days, right? Almost everybody has a degree. But the social mobility aspect of it, which is actually the true measure of people's happiness, is not progressing as well as it did before. So, for example, what it means is that, you know, you come up with a degree, right? Then you become a gig platform worker. So the social mobility aspect is what making people feel unhappy about the way things are moving.
Right. So this perception then will affect, to a large extent, national unity, especially when we look at a diverse society like Malaysia.
Yes. So that is why we come back to the horseshoe theory, the extreme left and extreme right coming together and saying that we need a new system because the system is not working for everybody, right? And that is why many of them are willing to take a chance to break the system and rebuild from scratch.
AT, you called it growing pains earlier, but it's apparent three-quarter of Malaysians feel, in other words, we need a new system.
No, again, right, so how much of that is going to really translate into real action on the ground, right? So this may be mood, like, you know, maybe this is the change, but then really has it, even if you see everything that has happened in the last couple of years, have really people moved in the needle to say, look, let's reset the system. We're still realigning, reconfiguring, we are trying to recalibrate, but we're not reset.
Okay, then I move on. According to latest data, 67% of Malaysians now believe that the economy is rigged to benefit the rich and powerful, i.e. the elite.
The same question, right? So very fact that the middle class don't seem to see that upward mobility that you spoke about, both in terms of economy and also social mobility, and says, look, we seem to be left out. Even with this new government in place and with new visions of the nation, we don't seem to still be plugged into the system.
Okay.
Why is it that we don't be able to harness these benefits?
There's lots to unpack here. These may just remain numbers and figures, but they do translate into indexes, perceptions, and as you very clearly pointed out, the measurement of our happiness as well. Nearly half of Malaysians agree from these findings that a strong leader willing to break the rules is needed to fix the country. The horseshoe theory, we need a new system. What do you think what do you think this says about the public's trust within the current system? You've seen the numbers, Kiran. You're part of course, this findings.
So it's a common thread, right? If they feel the system is not working, it's rigged towards the rich and powerful, what they want? A leader who comes in, who's able to break the rules, go away from status quo and fix the system, isn't it? So it's a common thread. So again, going back to the New York mayoral race, Mamdani, right? About 3-4 months back, he had single digit with no brand name recognition at all. Zero name recognition. And now he's the leading candidate for the mayoral race. Am I right? Why? Because he's coming out with something new, different, bold, and so on. Even state-owned grocery stores and so on, right? So his ideas are very, very radical, but it is something, a breath of fresh air for a lot of New Yorkers and so on. It's a new system, a different system than they're used to it.
Agreed, right? So again, statistics all depends on which side of it you're taking. So you say for half of Malaysians, right? So the other half actually is slightly less than half. It's 48% if I'm not mistaken. If the number of Malaysians who feel that we're okay. So in a way, the other half thinks we're okay. The current system works for us. We just need to recalibrate.
67%. That's more than half.
Yeah.
67%.
Of those who want to see the change, right?
Yes.
Who
So
believe
that's
the economy is rigged. Yeah.
The economy is rigged. But then the other ones who feel that for 52, if I'm not mistaken, those who feel that there needs to be a strong leader to fix the country. The other half still feels we can work with the system. So to many ways, that's the reason why we have got a government which is don't have a majority of their own. Simply because a good half of the population really feels that we're middle of the line. They're neither here nor there. They're not too radical in their approaches. They also say, look, we can work with them.
40% remains status quo.
Yes.
They didn't know whether they should be left or right or
and they will remain status quo. They'll still remain middle of the.
But I think what was interesting is the trend. We should not look at a number as static number because it can go up 5%, go down 10%, whatever. But if you see a tracking which we've been doing since about 10 years ago, you see the trend. The trend is moving that they want a new system. And why they want a new system? Social mobility is decreasing. They feel that they are left behind. It's not a free and fair, equal society, whether it's the judiciary, whether it's economic, and so on. So this is, it's not, the sky is not falling, but objects in the mirror closer than you think it is right now. So it is something which the policymakers should take note of.
Do you think there's a more uprising or awareness about trends that's happening around the world in terms of how societies are shaped and what is being put forward by the leaders? And you have most of the numbers here, Kiran. What is this reflective of through that research? I'm going to hold you to that thought and go to AT first.
I think it's basically change is the only constant, right? So I think many of the people, the younger demographics, the urban demographics, certainly subscribe to this fast-paced change, and they want this change. They don't want to wait for the next general election to make this change. They want the change now because it affects their life now, right? So whereas the what you call rural population probably a little bit more forgiving, but then Malaysia is one of those unique places where this is much harder to read because not only we have social demographics, we have also got racial and religious tones to many of this data that's coming out, right? So we are in a very way, the permutations are huge. And if somebody can figure this out, I think he's already on top of his class now.
Kiran.
Sure. I think what we are seeing now is because of all these factors and so on, the trust in for the government to make hard choices, for example, is SST, whatever justification they do, because economic reasons and so on, and the fairer distribution of the taxes and so on, has not convinced the rakyat that is a pain which that they have to make. because they feel in many ways, if you see the studies we were doing, is some of the policies, if you use the Malay words, is not berjibar rakyat. You know what I mean?
Not people-centric.
It's not people-centric. They really don't understand the livelihood and so on. I mean, they feel that while economic theory makes sense and so on, right? Deficit needs to reduce, a fairer distribution of in our taxes and so, but they don't feel that this is the right way to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
So there is still some discourse happening at the ground level where people are still unhappy with the way things are. However, there's also a little bit more confidence in the fact that things will improve,
Hopeful.
or we are on there.
They are
Hopeful
hopeful.
and aspirational. Thank you, gentlemen,
Yes.
for coming in and sharing your insights as well as the key findings. Well, that's a wrap for today's edition of The Nation. Of course, we'd like to thank our guests for sharing their valuable insights and perspectives. Now, while challenges remain, it's encouraging to see that hope and desire among Malaysians for more meaningful and positive change remains. I'm Jessie Chahal. Thanks for watching, and be sure to follow us for more in-depth conversations on issues that matter. See you next time. Bye.